They threw her out into the rain with nothing but the clothes on her back. No coat, no money, no dignity. Beatrice Caldwell, the matriarch of the wealthy Caldwell dynasty, stood on the porch of the family estate, smirking as she watched her daughter-in-law, Genevieve, shiver in the cold. Even Genevieve's husband, Henry, turned his back, too weak to fight his mother. They thought they had finally won. They thought they had discarded a gold-digging nobody. But they made one fatal calculation. They didn't check the land deed. And they certainly didn't know that the quiet, humble woman they just evicted was holding a document signed by the Crown itself. By morning, the Caldwells wouldn't just be regretting their cruelty. They would be begging for mercy from the only woman who could save them from total ruin. This is the story of the royal eviction. The Caldwell estate, Harrow Hall, sat on the edge of the Surrey Hills like a predator waiting to pounce. It was a sprawling, Georgian monstrosity that smelled of old money and fresh judgment. For 3 years, Genevieve Carter, Jen to her friends, had lived there. Or rather, she had survived there. Genevieve was a librarian. At least, that's what her employment record said. She was quiet, composed, and possessed a natural elegance that you couldn't buy, though the Caldwells certainly tried to buy everything else. When she met Henry Caldwell at a charity gala in London, it was a whirlwind. Henry was charming, if a bit soft around the edges, the heir to the Caldwell shipping fortune. He loved Jen's simplicity. He loved that she didn't care about his money. But his family? That was a different story. Beatrice Caldwell, Henry's mother, was a woman who wore pearls like armour and viewed anyone with a net worth under £10 million as a distinct species of rodent. "She's a mouse, Henry," Beatrice had said loudly at their engagement party, swirling her Chardonnay. "A little library mouse. What does she bring to the lineage? Dusty books and a cheap cardigan?" Henry had laughed nervously. "She makes me happy, Mother." Happiness doesn't maintain an estate, Henry. Connections do. From the moment Genevieve moved into Harrow Hall, it was a war of attrition. Beatrice and her daughter, Felicity, a woman who spent more time on her plastic surgeon's table than with her own children, made it their mission to remind Genevieve she didn't belong. They would switch the place cards at dinner to seat her next to the deaf elderly aunt. They would accidentally spill red wine on her only designer dress. They spoke French exclusively when she was in the room, unaware that Genevieve was fluent, but chose not to engage. But the real trouble began on a Tuesday in November. The Caldwell shipping firm was in trouble. Brexit regulations and a few bad investments by Henry's father, Richard, had left the company cash poor. They needed liquidity, and they needed it fast. Dinner that night was tense. The long mahogany table was set for 6. Beatrice sat at the head, looking like a vulture. "We need the Kensington merger," Richard grumbled, cutting his steak aggressively. "If we don't get the Kensington family to sign off on the port access, we're bleeding millions by Christmas." "Can't we just buy the land?" Felicity asked, scrolling on her phone under the table. "It's not for sale," Richard snapped. "It's held in a blind trust. Old aristocracy. The kind that doesn't pick up the phone." Genevieve looked up from her soup. "Maybe you should try writing a letter. A personal appeal sometimes works better than lawyers." The table went silent. Felicity snorted. "Oh, bless her heart." Felicity laughed. "The librarian thinks multinational logistics deals are solved with pen pals. Stick to the Dewey Decimal System, General." Beatrice offered a cold, thin smile. "Felicity is right, dear. This is the real world, not one of your fairy tales. The people who own that land are royal adjacent. They don't read letters from commoners." Genevieve wiped her mouth delicately. She didn't say what she wanted to say. She didn't mention that the blind trust Richard was sweating over was managed by a firm called Pendleton and Associates. She didn't mention that she knew Arthur Pendleton quite well. "I just think kindness goes a long way," Genevieve said softly. "Kindness is for poor people who can't afford leverage," Beatrice snapped. Now, Henry, about your wife's allowance. We need to cut costs. I think £500 a month is plenty for her books and whatever it is she does. Henry looked down at his plate. Mother, Jen is my wife. It's our money. It's family money, Henry, Beatrice corrected. And until she contributes something other than silence and drab clothing, she is an expense, an unnecessary one. Genevieve felt the familiar sting of humiliation. She looked at Henry, waiting for him to defend her, to slam his fist on the table, to say, "Enough!" Henry cut a piece of potato and ate it. He said nothing. That was the moment the clock started ticking. Genevieve realized that Henry wasn't just soft, he was cowardly. And in the Caldwell house, if you weren't the butcher, you were the cattle. 2 weeks later, the atmosphere in Harrow Hall shifted from hostile to dangerous. The financial pressure on the Caldwells was mounting. They needed a scapegoat, or perhaps a way to liquidate assets without looking desperate. It was the night of the annual Caldwell Winter Ball. The house was filled with London's elite. Politicians, investors, and social climbers packed the ballroom. Genevieve wore a simple vintage navy gown she had bought at an auction years ago. It was understated but stunning. Beatrice, dripping in diamonds, intercepted Henry and Genevieve near the champagne tower. "Henry, go speak to Lord Hummel. He's looking to invest," Beatrice ordered. As Henry scurried off, Beatrice turned her gaze to Genevieve. "You look adequate," Beatrice sneered, "though that necklace looks like costume jewelry. Did you get it at a high street shop?" Genevieve touched the small sapphire pendant at her throat. "It was a gift from my grandfather." "Quaint," Beatrice muttered. "Listen to me. Tonight is crucial. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't embarrass us. And for God's sake, stay away from the safe in the library. Richard has the sapphire collection out for appraisal, and we don't need your sticky fingers near real wealth." Genevieve stiffened. "I have no interest in your jewelry, Beatrice." "We'll see," Beatrice said darkly. The night wore on. Genevieve spent most of it on the balcony, avoiding the sharp tongues of Felicity and her clique. Around 11 p.m., a commotion broke out in the main hall. The music stopped. Richard Caldwell was standing on the grand staircase, his face purple with rage. "Lock the doors!" he bellowed. "Nobody leaves!" A murmur of panic went through the crowd. Henry ran to his father. "Dad, what's going on?" "The Star of Surrey!" Richard shouted, referring to the family's most valuable diamond necklace, worth nearly £2 million. "It's gone, stolen from the library safe." Security guards began moving through the crowd. Beatrice marched to the center of the room, her eyes locking instantly onto Genevieve. "Search her," Beatrice commanded, pointing a manicured finger at her daughter-in-law. "Mother, you can't be serious," Henry stammered. "Jen wouldn't. She's the only one with a motive, Henry. She has no money. She's been complaining about her allowance, and I saw her coming out of the library 20 minutes ago." It was a lie. A blatant, verifiable lie. But in a room full of people who feared Beatrice more than they loved the truth, no one spoke up. "I was on the balcony," Genevieve said, her voice shaking but clear. "Ask the waiter who served me water." "Search her purse!" Felicity yelled, grabbing Genevieve's clutch from her hands. Before Genevieve could react, Felicity upended the small bag onto the marble floor. Lipstick, a phone, a handkerchief, and a glimmer of heavy diamonds. The Star of Surrey clattered onto the floor. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of Genevieve's lungs. She stared at the necklace. She had never touched it. She had never even seen it up close. "I didn't put that there," Genevieve whispered, looking at Henry. "Henry, you know I didn't." Henry looked at the necklace. Then he looked at his mother's furious face. Then at the crowd of judging elites. "Henry," Genevieve pleaded. Henry took a step back. "How could you, Jen?" he muttered, his voice full of artificial heartbreak. "After everything my family gave you." It was a setup, a clumsy, brutal setup, designed to give Henry grounds for a divorce without alimony, or perhaps to claim insurance money while getting rid of the problem wife. "Call the police," Richard ordered. "No," Beatrice said, raising a hand. The room went silent. "We will not have a scandal. We will handle this internally." She walked up to Genevieve, invading her personal space. "You are going to leave this house tonight. You will sign an annulment paper admitting to infidelity and theft to avoid prison, and you will never speak the name Caldwell again." Genevieve looked at Henry. He was studying his shoes. Something inside Genevieve broke, but it wasn't a break that led to tears. It was the breaking of a dam. "You want me to leave?" Genevieve asked, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel. "I want you gone," Beatrice spat. "Fine," Genevieve said. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply smoothed her dress. "But remember this moment, Beatrice. Remember that you asked for this." It was raining. Of course it was raining. It was a torrential English downpour that turned the gravel driveway into a river. The security guards escorted Genevieve to the front door. Beatrice, Felicity, and Henry stood in the foyer. "My coat," Genevieve said. "It's in the closet." "That coat was bought with Caldwell money," Felicity sneered. "You leave with what you came with. Nothing." Beatrice nodded to the guard. He shoved Genevieve forward. She stumbled onto the wet porch steps. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her. The sound echoed like a gunshot. She was alone. It was 11:30 p.m. She was 5 miles from the nearest town. The rain soaked through her silk dress in seconds. She was shivering uncontrollably. She walked down the long driveway, the gravel cutting into her thin heels. She reached the iron gates at the end of the property. They were locked. She had to climb over the side wall, tearing her dress and scraping her leg. She stood on the dark country road. She had her phone. Felicity had forgotten to confiscate that. Genevieve's hands were shaking so hard she could barely type. She didn't call a taxi. She didn't call a friend. She dialed a number that she hadn't used in 10 years. A number she promised her grandfather she would only use in an absolute emergency. The phone rang once. "Secure line. Identify," a crisp male voice answered. "Authorization code Alpha Zero Royal 7, Genevieve said, her teeth chattering. "This is Lady Genevieve of Montclair. Protocol Lioness is in effect." There was a pause. The tone on the other end changed instantly. It went from bureaucratic to reverent. "My lady, we were not aware you were active. Are you in danger?" "I have been evicted from my residence at Harrow Hall. I am on the roadside. I require extraction. And get Sir Arthur Pendleton on the line. Wake him up. Immediately, your ladyship. ETA for extraction is 4 minutes. Do not move." Genevieve hung up. She stood in the rain, looking back at the glowing lights of Harrow Hall up on the hill. The music had restarted. They were celebrating. 4 minutes later, the darkness of the country road was shattered by blinding white LED lights. It wasn't a taxi. 3 blacked-out Range Rovers tore around the corner, moving in a tactical formation. They screeched to a halt in front of her. Men in suits jumped out before the cars even fully stopped. One held a large umbrella, another a thick wool coat. "Lady Genevieve?" The lead security officer bowed his head as he shielded her from the rain. He draped the coat over her shoulders. "My apologies for the delay. Are you injured?" "I'm cold, Thomas," she said, recognizing the head of her family's private security detail. "Take me to the London residence." "Yes, ma'am." As she climbed into the heated leather seat of the middle vehicle, a man in the front seat turned around. It was Sir Arthur Pendleton, the most feared solicitor in London, and the executor of the Royal Trust. He was wearing pajamas under a trench coat, looking dishevelled but furious. "I got the call," Arthur said, handing her a flask of brandy. "They threw you out. The Caldwells." Genevieve took a sip. The warmth hit her stomach. "They framed me for theft, Arthur." And Henry watched. Arthur's eyes narrowed. He pulled a tablet from his briefcase. "Harrow Hall. Harrow Hall." He tapped the screen. Then he stopped. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. "Oh," Arthur whispered. "Oh, this is going to be fun." "What is it?" Genevieve asked. They don't know, do they? Arthur chuckled darkly. They think they own Harrow Hall. They do own it. It's been in the Caldwell family for 100 years. They own the bricks, Arthur corrected. They own the house. But the land, the 500 acres the house sits on, that's under a 99-year lease from the Montclair Duchy, your grandfather's estate. Genevieve froze. Arthur turned the tablet to face her. The lease expires. Let me see. Oh my. It expires next Tuesday. Genevieve looked at the date. And, Arthur continued, the contract stipulates that if the lease is not renewed by the direct blood heir of the Montclair line, the land, and all structures upon it, reverts to the Crown estate, under your direct control. Genevieve stared at the rain streaking against the bulletproof glass. So, she whispered, I own the ground they walk on. Technically, Arthur grinned, as of next Tuesday, you can order them to move their house off your grass. Or you can seize it. Genevieve leaned back in the seat. The shivering stopped. Arthur, she said softly. Yes, my lady? Prepare the paperwork. I want to serve them an eviction notice, personally. The convoy sped off into the night, leaving the Caldwell estate behind. The storm was still raging over Harrow Hall, but inside the Range Rover, it was perfectly calm. The war had begun, and the Caldwells had just handed the enemy a nuclear weapon. The morning sun hit the wet cobblestones of London with a stark, revealing brightness. Inside the penthouse suite of the Montclair townhouse in Kensington, the atmosphere was a world away from the drafty, hostile corridors of Harrow Hall. Genevieve stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror. The terrified, shivering woman from the night before was gone. In her place stood Lady Genevieve, the only daughter of the late Duke of Montclair, a lineage that traced back to the Plantagenets. She wore a tailored cream power suit that cost more than Henry Caldwell's car. Her hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun to avoid criticizing comments from Beatrice, was blown out in cascading waves. Your schedule, ma'am, said Thomas, her head of security, handing her a tablet. Thank you, Thomas. Has the press caught wind of the incident? No, my lady. The Caldwells are keeping it quiet. They've told the staff you've gone to a sanitarium for nervous exhaustion. They are playing the victim. Genevieve laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. Of course they are. Beatrice wouldn't want her friends to know she threw a woman out into a storm. It lacks finesse. Meanwhile, back at Harrow Hall, the mood was paradoxically jubilant. Beatrice Caldwell sat in the morning room, sipping Earl Grey. The storm had passed, and the estate looked green and lush. Is she gone? Felicity asked, walking in with a face mask on. Completely, Beatrice said, buttering a scone. I had the maids clear out her room this morning. It smells of bleach and victory. We can finally turn that room into a proper walk-in closet for you, darling. Henry walked in, looking pale. Mother, I can't find the file for the Kensington merger. Jen used to organize the study. Oh, stop whining, Henry, Beatrice snapped. Hire a secretary, a professional one, not a charity case. It's just... Henry rubbed his temples. Did we have to do it like that? The necklace. It was intense. It was necessary, Richard grunted from behind his newspaper. She was dead weight, Henry. And now we have the insurance claim for the necklace. £2 million. That solves our cash flow problem until the merger goes through. It's a win-win. Just then, the butler, an elderly man named Stevens, who had always been kind to Genevieve, entered with a silver tray. He looked nervous. Sir, a letter arrived by courier. Special delivery. It required a biometric signature. Richard frowned. Who is it from? It bears the seal of the Crown Estate, sir, and the legal offices of Pendleton and Associates. Richard put down his paper. Pendleton? That's the firm handling the land trust. Probably just the lease renewal paperwork. I told you, Beatrice, it's a standard formality. He tore open the heavy, cream-colored envelope. He scanned the document. See, Richard said, tossing it on the table. Notice of lease expiration. Harrow Hall Estate. Expiry date November 24th. That's next Tuesday. They want a meeting to discuss the transition of assets. Transition of assets? Beatrice frowned. What does that mean? Why don't they just send the bill for the renewal fee? It's standard legal jargon. Richard waved his hand dismissively. They want to squeeze a higher rent out of us. Typical aristocracy. Land rich, cash poor. We'll go there on Tuesday, wave a check in their faces, and lock it down for another 99 years. I'll come, Beatrice announced. I want to make sure they know who they are dealing with. The Caldwells are not to be trifled with. Back in London, inside the mahogany-walled office of Sir Arthur Pendleton, Genevieve was reading the same letter copy. They received it at 9 a.m., Arthur said, pouring himself a coffee. Stevens confirmed receipt. And their reaction? Genevieve asked. Predictable arrogance. They assume it's a negotiation. Genevieve walked to the window, looking out over the city. They don't know that the Montclair Trust has a character clause, do they, Arthur? They do not, Arthur smiled wickedly. Section 4, paragraph B of the original 1924 deed. The lease may only be renewed if the tenant demonstrates moral fortitude, community standing, and good stewardship of the land and its inhabitants. And its inhabitants, Genevieve repeated. I was an inhabitant. Precisely. By evicting you without cause and endangering your life, they have violated the character clause. You don't just have the right to evict them, Genevieve. You have the right to seize their assets on the property as compensation for breach of contract. Genevieve turned back to him. Her eyes were hard. I don't want their money, Arthur. I want their pride. I want them to sit into this office and realize that the mouse they kicked out is the lioness who is about to eat them alive. Tuesday then, Arthur said. 10 a.m. I'll clear my schedule. Oh, and Arthur. Yes? Make sure the air conditioning in the waiting room is broken. I want Beatrice to sweat. Tuesday arrived with a grey, oppressive sky. The Caldwell family, Richard, Beatrice, and Henry, stepped out of their chauffeur-driven Bentley in front of the glass skyscraper in the City of London. They were dressed for battle. Beatrice wore a Chanel suit and a hat that looked like a weapon. Richard was in pinstripes. Henry looked like a man marching to the gallows, though he didn't know why. They walked into the lobby of Pendleton and Associates. It was a fortress of intimidation. Marble floors, silent elevators, and art on the walls that cost more than most houses. We are here to see Arthur Pendleton. Richard barked at the receptionist. We have an appointment. The Caldwells. The receptionist, a young woman with glasses, didn't look up from her screen. Please take a seat. Sir Arthur is in a meeting with the principal landholder. We are the landholders, Beatrice scoffed. You are the tenants, ma'am, the receptionist corrected, finally looking up with a bored expression. Please sit. They sat. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 45. The room was sweltering. As Genevieve had requested, the climate control in that specific waiting zone had been deactivated. Beatrice was fanning herself with a magazine, her makeup starting to shine. This is outrageous, Beatrice hissed. Do they know who we are? We are Caldwell Shipping. Calm down, Mother, Henry muttered. We need this lease. I'm going in there, Richard said, standing up. He marched toward the double oak doors. Before he could reach them, the doors swung open. Sir Arthur Pendleton stepped out. He looked fresh, cool, and incredibly expensive. Mr. Caldwell, Arthur said smoothly. So sorry for the delay. The principal took some convincing regarding your application. Application? Richard sputtered. We are here to sign the renewal. I have a cheque for £50,000 right here. Arthur looked at the cheque and chuckled. It was a dry, dusty sound. 50,000? Oh dear. Richard, I'm afraid the situation has evolved. Please come in. They filed into the boardroom. It was massive, a table long enough to land a plane on. At the far end of the table, a high-backed leather chair was turned away from them, facing the panoramic window. Smoke curled up from the chair. Someone was sitting there. "Sit," Arthur commanded. He didn't offer them water. The Caldwells sat on the lower side of the table. "As you know," Arthur began, opening a file, "your lease on Harrow Hall expires today at noon. That is in—" He checked his Rolex. 14 minutes. "So give us the paper," Beatrice snapped. "We'll sign." "There is a complication," Arthur said. "The Montclair estate has invoked the character clause. They have received reports of unsavory behavior within the residence, abuse of staff, domestic instability, moral bankruptcy." "That's a lie!" Beatrice shrieked. "We are pillars of the community. We hosted the winter ball just last week." "Yes," a voice came from the high-backed chair. It was a female voice, smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly familiar. "The ball where a necklace went missing." Henry froze. His face went white. The chair slowly swiveled around. Beatrice gasped. Richard dropped his pen. Sitting there was Genevieve, but not the Genevieve they knew. This woman was wearing a tailored emerald suit that matched her eyes. On her finger sat the Montclair signet ring, heavy gold and onyx. She looked powerful. She looked regal. She looked at them with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying insects. "Jen," Henry whispered. "What? What are you doing here?" "Hello, Henry," she said. "You're sitting in my chair." "Your chair?" Beatrice laughed nervously. "What is this joke? Did you sleep with the lawyer to get a seat at the table, you little slut?" Arthur slammed his hand on the table. The sound cracked like a whip. "You will speak to Lady Genevieve with the respect due to a peer of the realm," Arthur roared. "She is the Duchess of Montclair in SUO Jura. She is the sole owner of the Montclair Trust, and she is your landlord." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the hard drive in the corner. Beatrice's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. "Duchess, but she's a librarian." "I was a librarian because I love books, Beatrice," Genevieve said, leaning forward, "and because I wanted to be loved for me, not my title. I wanted to see if a man could love Genevieve the person, not Genevieve the Duchess." She looked at Henry. Her gaze was filled with pity. "I got my answer." "Jen, please," Henry stammered, standing up. "I didn't know. If I had known—" "If you had known I was worth £500 million, you would have treated me better," Genevieve finished for him. "That is exactly the problem, Henry." "This is absurd," Richard shouted, trying to regain control. "Fine. You're rich. Congratulations. You tricked us." "Now how much for the lease?" "We'll pay double." Genevieve picked up a document from the table. "The lease is not for sale, Richard. You have violated the terms, specifically the clause regarding the safety and dignity of inhabitants. When you threw me out into a storm 3 nights ago, you evicted the landowner from her own property." She tossed the document down the long table. It slid perfectly, stopping right in front of Beatrice. "That is an eviction notice," Genevieve said calmly. "You have 48 hours to vacate Harrow Hall." "You can't do this," Beatrice screamed, standing up. "We have lived there for 30 years. It's our home." "It's my house," Genevieve corrected. "You just rented the view." "I won't go," Beatrice hissed. "I'll squat. I'll sue. I'll drag your name through the mud." Genevieve smiled. It was the smile of a predator who has already tripped the trap. "I was hoping you would say that," Genevieve said. She nodded to Arthur. Arthur pressed a button on the remote. A large screen on the wall flickered to life. It was footage from the winter ball. Security footage. High definition. It showed the library. It showed Felicity walking in. It showed Felicity opening the safe. She knew the combination. It showed Felicity taking the Star of Surrey necklace. Then the footage changed. It showed Felicity in the hallway, shoving the necklace into Genevieve's clutch bag while Genevieve was in the bathroom. The room was silent. "We recovered the footage from the cloud backup," Arthur explained. "Interestingly, Richard, you deleted the local files. But you forgot that the security system uploads to an off-site server, a server owned by the security company, which is a subsidiary of Montclair Holdings. Genevieve stood up. She walked slowly towards the Caldwells. "So here is your choice," she said softly. "Option A. You vacate my house in 48 hours. You leave everything. The furniture, the art, the cars. You take only your clothes, and you sign a full confession regarding the framed theft, which I will keep in a safe." She paused, letting the weight of it settle. "Option B. I release this video to the police and the press. Felicity goes to prison for grand larceny. You, Richard, go to prison for insurance fraud, since I know you filed that claim yesterday. And Beatrice? Well, you become the pariah of London society, the woman who framed a duchess." Genevieve stopped in front of Beatrice. She leaned in close. "Choose carefully, Beatrice. The clock is ticking." Beatrice looked at the screen. She looked at Richard, who was grey with shock. She looked at Henry, who was crying silently. She looked back at Genevieve. For the first time in her life, Beatrice Caldwell looked small. "We'll leave," Richard whispered. "I didn't hear you," Genevieve said. "We'll leave!" Beatrice shrieked, tears of rage streaming down her face. "Damn you! We'll leave!" "Good," Genevieve said. She turned her back on them. "Get out of my office! You're breathing my air!" 48 hours later, Harrow Hall was under siege, not by an army, but by auditors. Genevieve had not trusted the Caldwells to leave quietly, and she was right. When her team arrived at 8 a.m. on Thursday, they found Beatrice attempting to sew loose diamonds into the hem of her curtains, intending to smuggle them out in a laundry bag. Genevieve stood in the foyer, watching the chaos. She wasn't wearing a ball gown or a power suit today. She wore jeans and a cashmere sweater, holding a mug of coffee. She looked relaxed, younger, and infinitely more dangerous. "Check the lining of the fur coats," Genevieve instructed the head of the audit team. "Beatrice likes to hide bearer bonds in the shoulder pads." "You witch!" Beatrice screamed from the top of the stairs. She was being escorted down by 2 female security officers. She was stripped of her finery, wearing a simple tracksuit that looked alien on her frame. "This is illegal. Squatters' rights." "You aren't a squatter, Beatrice," Genevieve called up, sipping her coffee. "You're a trespasser, and I'm being generous. Arthur wanted to have you arrested for the silverware found in your boot." The house was being systematically stripped of the Caldwell influence. The portraits of Henry's ancestors were being taken down, not to be destroyed, but to be put into storage. The gaudy gold statues Beatrice had installed were being covered in sheets. Henry appeared from the library. He was carrying a cardboard box. It contained his university degree, a few photos, and a stress ball. It was the sum total of his life that wasn't paid for by the estate. He stopped when he saw Genevieve. He looked haggard. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. "Jen," he croaked. "Hello, Henry." He walked over to her, dropping the box on the floor. He tried to take her hand, but Thomas, the security chief, stepped forward, blocking him. Henry flinched. "Can we just talk? Privately," Henry pleaded. "Please, for the sake of the 3 years we spent together." Genevieve nodded to Thomas, who stepped back but kept his hand on his earpiece. "You have 2 minutes, Henry." Henry ran a hand through his hair. "I know my mother is difficult. I know she went too far. But I loved you, General. You have to believe that. I was just stuck. I was trying to keep the peace." "You weren't keeping the peace, Henry," Genevieve said sadly. "You were keeping your inheritance. You watched them humiliate me for 3 years because you were afraid if you stood up for me, Daddy would cut off the credit card. That's not true. I loved you for you. Did you?" Genevieve tilted her head. "Then why did you believe I stole the necklace? Why didn't you ask me? Why was your first instinct to save your own skin?" Henry opened his mouth, but no words came out. The truth hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. You fell in love with a quiet girl because she made you feel big, Genevieve said softly. You liked that I was poor. You liked that I was grateful for the crumbs your family threw at me. It made you feel like a savior. But the moment I became a liability, the moment I needed you to actually be a man, you folded like a cheap suit. I can change, Henry said, tears welling in his eyes. We can start over. With your position, we could do amazing things. I could help you manage the estate. I know the shipping business. Genevieve laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but a final one. Henry, you almost bankrupted your own family firm in a decade. Why on earth would I let you near the Montclair Trust? She signaled to Thomas. Time's up. Jen, please, where are we supposed to go? Henry cried, as Thomas guided him towards the door. We have no liquidity. The accounts are frozen. I heard there's a lovely council flat in Peckham available, Genevieve said, turning her back on him. It's cozy. You'll learn to budget. It builds character. Isn't that what your mother always told the staff? The heavy oak doors opened. Outside, a single battered van waited. It wasn't a limousine. It was a rental moving van. Beatrice was already in the passenger seat, sobbing into a handkerchief. Felicity was in the back, sitting on a pile of garbage bags containing her clothes, scrolling frantically on her phone, likely realizing she had been blocked by all her high society friends. Henry walked out into the sunlight. He turned back one last time, looking at the majestic house, the sprawling lawns, and the woman standing in the doorway who owned it all. The doors closed. The lock clicked. Genevieve let out a long breath. She looked around the empty foyer. It was silent. The toxicity was gone. Stevens? She called out. The elderly butler stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. He had tears in his eyes, but he was smiling. Yes, Your Grace. Open the windows, Stevens, Genevieve said, walking toward the grand staircase. Let's get some fresh air in here, and bring up a bottle of the 1954 Montclair Reserve. I believe we have a toast to make. Very good, Your Grace. And to whom are we toasting? To the mouse, Genevieve smiled. She finally found her roar. 6 months is a long time in politics, but it is an eternity in high society. In the half-year since the great eviction of Harrow Hall, the landscape of London's elite had shifted tectonically. For Genevieve, the transition had been a baptism by fire. She had moved from the shadows of a library into the blinding spotlight of the Montclair Duchy. She had spent her days in boardrooms, learning the intricacies of land trusts, diversified portfolios, and philanthropic strategy. She had traded her silence for a voice that moved markets. The mouse was dead. The lioness had taken the throne. On the evening of June 15th, the air in London was thick and humid, the kind of summer night that clings to the skin. It was the night of the Serpentine Summer Gala, the crown jewel of the social season. This was not merely a party. It was a summit. Deals were brokered over canapes, marriages were arranged in the powder rooms, and social standings were cemented or destroyed on the dance floor. Inside the penthouse suite of the Kensington townhouse, Genevieve stood before a full-length mirror. Her team of stylists had just finished. She wore a custom creation by Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen, a gown of midnight blue velvet that seemed to absorb the light, shimmering with thousands of tiny, hand-stitched crystals that mimicked the night sky. Around her neck, resting cool and heavy against her skin, was the Star of Surrey. For decades, the necklace had been a symbol of the Caldwell family's vanity. Beatrice had worn it like a weapon. Felicity had used it as a tool for framing an innocent woman. Now, it had been legally reclaimed, cleaned, and reset. Tonight, it wasn't a symbol of vanity. It was a war trophy. You look formidable, Your Grace, Arthur Pendleton said from the doorway. He was adjusting his cufflinks, looking dapper in a tuxedo that was likely older than Genevieve herself. Genevieve touched the sapphire pendant. I don't want to look formidable, Arthur. I want to look inevitable. I believe you have achieved both. He smiled. The car is waiting. The press has been camped out since 4 p.m. Then, meanwhile, across the city, the atmosphere in the two-bedroom council flat in Peckham was less serene. The air-conditioning unit was broken, and the windows were stuck, trapping the heat and the smell of burnt toast inside the cramped living room. Beatrice Caldwell stood in front of a cracked bathroom mirror, applying a layer of foundation that was slightly too pale for her summer skin. The stress of the last 6 months had etched deep canyons around her mouth. Her hair, once professionally blown out 3 times a week, was now brittle and dyed from a box kit she had bought at the pharmacy. "Richard, where are the cufflinks?" she screamed, her voice shrill. "The gold ones!" "We sold the gold ones in March, Beatrice," Richard yelled back from the bedroom, where he was struggling to button a tuxedo shirt that had been tight 10 years ago and was now actively restricting his breathing. "To pay the solicitors. Well, find something," she snapped. "We cannot look poor. Not tonight. Tonight is the turning point." In the kitchen, Henry sat at a wobbly table, staring at a pair of rented dress shoes. They were scuffed at the heel. He tried to polish them with a blackened rag, but his heart wasn't in it. He looked at his phone. No messages. His friends, Julian, Marcus, Sterling, had all ghosted him the week after the eviction. The group chat was dead. He was radioactive. "Do we have to go?" Henry asked quietly. "It's going to be humiliating." Beatrice stormed into the kitchen, looking like a spectre of her former self, in a dress that was 2 seasons out of fashion. "We have to go because we are desperate, Henry. Lord Kensington is going to be there. If your father can get 5 minutes with him, just 5 minutes, we might secure the consulting contract for the North Sea route. That contract is the difference between this," she gestured vaguely at the peeling wallpaper, "and getting our lives back." "She's going to be there," Henry whispered. "I'll let her be there," Beatrice hissed, though her hands were shaking. "She's new money, a flash in the pan. The Montclair girl might have the title, but we have the history. People remember the Caldwell name. Now get up. The Uber is 5 minutes away." "Uber?" Henry winced. "We're arriving at the Serpentine Gala in a Toyota Prius." "We'll have him drop us around the corner," Richard said, entering the room, sweating profusely. "We walk the last 100 yards. Chin up. We are Caldwells." The arrival. The entrance to the Serpentine Pavilion in Hyde Park was a gauntlet of blinding flashes. The red carpet was flanked by photographers shouting the names of actresses, dukes, and billionaires. At 7:45 p.m., a vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom 60 polished to a mirror sheen and flying the small pennant of the Montclair Duchy, glided to a halt. The crowd went silent for a split second, then erupted. A footman opened the door. Genevieve stepped out. The flashes were like lightning. "Duchess! Over here! Duchess Genevieve!" She moved with a grace that couldn't be taught. She didn't smile too widely. She offered a calm, enigmatic expression that the cameras loved. She walked the carpet with Arthur on her arm, answering no questions, acknowledging the chaos with only a nod. She was the celestial body around which the event orbited. 15 minutes later, the Caldwells arrived. They had indeed walked the last 100 yards, but the humidity had done its work. Richard's face was slick with sweat. Beatrice's hem was slightly dusty from the gravel path. They approached the velvet rope where a large man with a clipboard stood guard. "Name?" the bouncer grunted. "Caldwell," Richard said, puffing out his chest. "Richard and Beatrice Caldwell. And Henry." The bouncer ran his finger down the list. He flipped the page. He flipped back. "Not on the list, mate." Beatrice's face went white. "That's impossible. We have attended this gala for 20 years. We are legacy donors." "Not this year," the bouncer said, bored. "List is strict. Capacity issues." "Check the digital addendum," Richard panicked, his voice rising an octave. "We wired the funds this morning. £10,000. It's all the liquidity we had. I don't handle accounting, sir. I handle the rope. If you're not on the list, you don't get in. Step aside. You're blocking the Minister of Defence." People in the line behind them began to murmur. Beatrice felt the familiar sting of judgment she used to inflict on others. She looked over the bouncer's shoulder, into the warm, golden glow of the pavilion. She could see the waiters with champagne trays. She could hear the string quartet. It was heaven, and she was in purgatory. "Please," Henry stepped forward. His voice cracked. "We just need to speak to Lord Kensington. It's life or death for us." From the top of the pavilion steps, 50 feet away, Genevieve watched. She held a crystal flute of vintage champagne, observing the scene like a hawk perched on a cliff. "They look pathetic," Arthur noted, standing beside her. "Shall I have security remove them? They are causing a scene." Genevieve watched Beatrice clutching her purse, her knuckles white. She watched Richard wiping sweat from his eyes. She watched Henry, looking at the ground, utterly defeated. It would be so easy to send them away, to let them walk back to the tube station in their rented shoes. "No," Genevieve said softly. Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Your Grace?" "Let them in," she said. "If we send them away, they can tell themselves they were victims of a clerical error. They can pretend they are still important, just excluded." She took a sip of champagne. "Let them in. Let them see what they threw away. Let them feel the silence of the room when they walk by. That is a far worse punishment." She signaled to her head of security, Thomas. He nodded and spoke into his earpiece. Down at the gate, the bouncer paused. He touched his ear. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. "All right," the bouncer said, unclipping the velvet rope. "Override from the host. You can go in. Standing room only. No table access." Beatrice nearly collapsed with relief. "Thank you. I knew it was a mistake." She smoothed her dress, trying to regain her composure. "Come, Richard. Henry, shoulders back." The gala. The Caldwells entered the pavilion, grabbing glasses of champagne from the first tray they saw, as if it were water in a desert. They moved into the crowd, scanning the room for friendly faces. "There's Lady Danbury," Beatrice whispered. "She always liked my lemon cake." Beatrice approached the elderly woman. "Martha, so good to see you." Lady Danbury turned. Her smile vanished instantly. She looked Beatrice up and down, noting the dyed hair and the dusty hem. "Oh, Beatrice, I heard you had moved." "North." "Just a temporary downsizing," Beatrice laughed nervously. "We are restructuring. Strategic liquidity." "I see," Lady Danbury said, turning her back. "Excuse me, I must find the waiter." It happened again and again. Former friends became suddenly fascinated by their phones. Business partners dove into conversations with strangers to avoid eye contact. The Caldwells were surrounded by 300 people, yet they were on a deserted island. They were radioactive. The scandal of the framed necklace and the eviction wasn't just gossip. It was a violation of the social contract. They were tacky, they were cruel, and worst of all, they were now poor. "We need Kensington," Richard muttered, chugging his champagne. "He's near the stage." They pushed their way toward the front, just as the lights dimmed. The hum of conversation died down. A spotlight hit the center of the stage. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, please welcome the patron of tonight's gala, the chairwoman of the Royal Historic Trust, and our host for the evening, Her Grace, the Duchess of Montclair." Beatrice froze. Her glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Genevieve stepped into the light. She was radiant. The Star of Surrey caught the spotlight, sending refracted beams of blue light across the room. She stood tall, her posture perfect, her face serene. The applause was thunderous. It wasn't polite applause. It was genuine admiration. "Thank you," Genevieve said, her voice clear and amplified, echoing off the high ceilings. "We are here tonight to support the Literacy for All initiative, because I believe that access to knowledge is the only thing that separates us. It is not blood. It is not bank accounts. It is the opportunity to write your own story. Henry stared up at her. He felt a physical pain in his chest. This was the woman who used to make him tea in the mornings. The woman who sat quietly reading paperbacks while his mother insulted her. He had thought she was plain. He realized now, with a sickening jolt, that she hadn't been plain. She had been obscured, and he had been the one casting the shadow. Genevieve continued, her eyes scanning the crowd. She found them. She locked eyes with Henry. "I learned a hard lesson this year," Genevieve said, departing from her prepared remarks. The room went deadly silent. "I learned that some families are built on love, and some are built on leverage. I learned that when you have nothing, you find out who truly stands beside you, and when you have everything, you find out who was only standing there for the view." Beatrice flinched as if she had been slapped. "True nobility," Genevieve said, her voice dropping to a hush that compelled the entire room to lean in, "is not about the land you own. It is about how you treat the people who walk on it. It is about kindness when no one is watching, because you never know. The person you push out into the storm might be the only one who can offer you shelter." She raised her glass. "To kindness, and to the future." "To kindness," the crowd roared back. Henry's hand was shaking so badly that his glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sharp crash that cut through the applause. Heads turned. Hundreds of eyes shifted from the radiant Duchess to the disheveled man standing in a puddle of champagne and broken glass. Beatrice closed her eyes. Richard looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. Genevieve didn't flinch. She simply looked at the broken glass, then up at Henry. She gave him a small, sad nod, a final acknowledgement, and then turned her back, walking off the stage to a fresh wave of applause. The final blow. As the music resumed, a lively waltz, Richard grabbed Henry's arm. "Pull yourself together. There's Kensington. He's going toward the bar. Move!" The Caldwells intercepted Lord Kensington, a tall, imposing man with silver hair near the exit. "Lord Kensington!" Richard gasped, breathless. "Richard Caldwell. We spoke last year about the logistics contract." Kensington stopped. He looked at Richard, then at the wet stain on Henry's trousers. "Ah, Mr. Caldwell," Kensington said coolly. "I was wondering if I would see you." "We are ready to sign," Richard said, pulling a crumpled business card from his pocket. "We can undercut the competition by 10%. We just need the liquidity injection to restart the fleet." Kensington didn't take the card. He looked past Richard, towards the dance floor, where Genevieve was laughing with Arthur Pendleton. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Richard," Kensington said. "Why?" Beatrice demanded. "We are the best in the business." "Because," Kensington said, his voice dropping to a chilly baritone, "I just concluded a handshake deal with the Montclair estate. They are acquiring a shipping division, and as part of our agreement, they have requested that all our partners adhere to a strict ethics and character standard." Kensington looked Beatrice in the eye. "You don't meet the standard, Mrs. Caldwell. Frankly, after what you did to that young woman, I wouldn't trust you to ship a package of biscuits, let alone £1 million of cargo." He stepped around them. "Good evening." The finality of it was crushing. It wasn't just a rejection. It was an execution. Security approached them a moment later. "Mr. Caldwell, we have reports of a disturbance with broken glass, and your standing room access has expired. We need to ask you to leave." The exit. The walk back to the gate was the longest of their lives. The music faded behind them. The laughter of the elite, the world they used to rule, drifted away into the night air. They stood on the sidewalk outside Hyde Park. The Rolls-Royce was still parked there, waiting for the Duchess. "Call the Uber," Beatrice whispered, her voice broken. "I can't," Henry said, looking at his phone. "Surge pricing. It's £40. We only have £25 on the debit card." "Then we walk," Richard said, staring at his shoes. They began the long trudge towards the tube station. Inside the pavilion, Genevieve watched them leave from the balcony. The night air was cool against her face. "Do you feel better?" Arthur asked, handing her a fresh glass. "I don't feel happy about their suffering, Arthur," Genevieve said honestly. "But I feel clean. I feel like the debt is paid. They will never recover from this," Arthur noted. "Kensington will tell everyone. They are finished." Genevieve turned away from the window, turning her back on the dark street where her former family walked in the cold. She looked toward the light, the music, and the people who respected her not for her money, but for her survival. "I know," Genevieve said, a small smile touching her lips. "Now play something fast, Arthur. I want to dance." As the orchestra swelled, Genevieve Carter, the girl who had been thrown out into the rain with nothing, spun into the center of the room, surrounded by light, finally and completely free. Genevieve's victory wasn't just about reclaiming a house or a title. It was about reclaiming her dignity. The Caldwells spent years believing that power came from money, exclusion, and cruelty. They thought that because Genevieve was quiet, she was weak. They thought that because she was kind, she was naive. But in the end, they learned the most painful lesson of all. The quietest people often have the loudest histories. Genevieve didn't need to scream to be heard. She simply needed to sign her name. Today, Harrow Hall stands not as a monument to the Caldwells' vanity, but as a sanctuary for the Literacy for All Foundation, hosting children from underprivileged backgrounds who, just like Genevieve once was, are looking for a place to belong. As for the Caldwells, they are a cautionary tale whispered in London society, a reminder that when you try to crush a diamond, you only make it shine brighter. Karma doesn't always come instantly, but when it arrives in a Rolls-Royce with a royal seal, it doesn't miss. What a satisfying ending for the Caldwells. Now, I have a question for you. If you were Genevieve, would you have let Henry back in, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of royal revenge and ultimate justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a shocking tale coming up next week about a billionaire who went undercover as a janitor in his own company, and you won't believe what he found. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.